Good evening. I'm Judith Morris. I am one of the board members for the Field Arts and Events Hall. So happy to see everybody here who's in person, and we also have a number of people who are live streaming. So that's a positive part of COVID, and maybe it won't change. I don't know. That's very good to have that option. This is our third. You can't hear us? There we go. Okay. Hold it closer. Okay. Okay, so this is our third community board gathering, and it's wonderful to see so many people here, and those, again, as I said, who are live streaming. And we always like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we are gathering is the territory of Sklallam, meaning the strong people. We welcome you to their lands who have stewarded this land through the generations and are the original and traditional peoples of this land. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting the land. We honor their ancestors, past, present, and future, and recognize their continued contributions to society. So, tonight's program, I think, is going to be really exciting. As board members and as an organization, one of the things we strive to do is look for ideas, leaders, and of the arts throughout, and then bring them back to our community. And tonight is a great example of that. Michael Greer is going to be speaking on the economic and social contributions of the arts to the community. And following that, we're going to have some respondents from our community, followed by a panel that will be discussing how we can help solve economic and social problems in Clallam County and Port Angeles. And then we're going to break into small groups for a very quick discussion, which has proved to be one of the most popular parts of our community board gatherings. And then finally, our board president, Judge Brooke Taylor, will be saying farewell, a few remarks, and reminding us of what's to come. And also, this evening is made possible by Claire Bishop and the Benjamin M. Phillips Foundation, who have been great supporters for us and have allowed us to have this gathering. Thank you, Claire. We appreciate it very much. Also, yeah, hands out for Claire and the Phillips Foundation. Conversations often spark ideas and action, and this is the beginning of us for our conversations. And we'll be having community discussions throughout once we have the hall open, which will be very exciting. We can announce that. And one of our, Jen Swanson, I'd like to introduce Jen Swanson, if you want to come up, Jen. Jen's with First Fed. They are our largest corporate donor at $2 million, and they've decided to sponsor community conversations once the hall is open.
Thank you, Judith. It is an honor to be here today with all of you in person and, of course, online as well. Is that a little bit better? Awesome, awesome. First Fed Bank is proud to support the Field Hall in their mission to strengthen our communities through art and through these events. So we're excited. We are kicking off tonight with our first event of the First Fed Community Conversations, as Judith mentioned. There will be many more events like this. We hope that you have a fabulous time this evening. Another one of those events is actually next year. First Fed will be celebrating their 100th anniversary, so we look forward to seeing you all there, and thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks, First Fed. A great partnership. We're really proud of that. The second introduction I get to do is an old friend, Karin Hannon. Karin's going to be introducing our keynote speaker. Karin is no stranger to the community since she's one of us, lived here for a long time. She's the founding mother of Wanda Fuca Festival. And I'd like to give a little plug for the Wanda Fuca Festival. It is back in full force May 27th through May 29th. Tickets are online. both for the 3-day pass and single tickets. We've missed it. We're glad it's back. Thanks, Karin, for starting it. Karin is now the director of the Washington State Arts Commission, better known as WA Arts. And it's always delightful to have her back. Thanks, Karin.
All right. Nice to see you all, and thanks for giving me a moment to talk a little bit about the Arts Commission and where it might fit in with everything we're doing here, and then I would love to introduce my good friend and colleague, Michael Greer. So this town, you know, the whole peninsula is going to benefit when the field hall finally opens, that curtain rises, and that stage goes live. I can't imagine how we're going to be received by all the visitors and tourists who come our way. I can only see it as a tremendous boon, you know, on so many levels for all of us. But as Judith said, I'm the executive director of ArtsWA. That is the Washington State Arts Commission, and thank you. This is such a really good tech crew. You should hire it. So I'm also a local, though, as you just heard. So when I'm not wandering the halls of the legislature or the budget office or talking to the governor about trying to get more money to the Arts Commission so we can then give it to you, I am here. And for the next few weeks, I'm actually going to be here full-time working remotely, so I'll be around. But at the Arts Commission, our mission essentially is to be a catalyst for the arts. And, you know, that means that we want to support every aspect of the arts in communities large and small. We have an expanding suite of programs, and they include our legacy programs like grants for organizations, which many of you get, thank goodness. Also our arts and education grants and resources, our creative district certification program. We run the state's public art program, which is now 5,000 pieces strong and growing in 1,300 different locations. And hundreds of the pieces are out here on the peninsula, in every school, up at the college, and so on. So look out for those. We also run the State Poet Laureate program in partnership with Humanities Washington. And right now, Rena Priest is the State Poet Laureate, our first Indigenous State Poet Laureate. She's from the Lummi tribe, and she's fabulous. And if she hasn't been out here yet, somebody should invite her, because she'd be pleased to come. We also run the Center for Washington Cultural Traditions to celebrate our indigenous and tribal traditions, as well as those of all the new immigrants coming into our state, all of us indeed, who bring our own traditions and sort of ways of celebrating and using the arts and our culture in a way to make a difference. The Center for Washington Cultural Traditions really focuses on that. And then there's our newer program, which has just got funded by the legislature at our request, and which is always a big deal. You know, they don't fund everything necessarily. In fact, they try not to fund most things very often, it seems. But in this case, they funded what we call our WAM program. And that stands for our Wellness, Arts, and the Military. So if any of these things sound like something that might fit in any of the programs you're doing, and we have other programs too, but please come and talk to me afterwards or really at any time. So, the past several years have been very challenging for us all. And they've been devastating for most of the arts and creative sectors, as you only too well know. At ArtsWA, we pivoted everything when COVID started to sector relief, to providing grants, to finding more money to be able to grant out, to bringing people together around guidance, around reopening whenever that was going to be possible. We completely focused on COVID relief. And we did that working in partnership with many organizations, but Washington Festivals and Events Association was one of them. ArtsFund was certainly one of them. And we also collected and gathered data, and you're going to hear about much of that tonight. We needed to know sort of what was going on. You know, how bad was it? What would it take to help us open our doors again and to thrive again? And we're still very much in the middle of COVID, and the programming that most of us are doing at the state or regional level is still very focused on recovery. So to tell us more about that, it really is my pleasure to introduce Michael Greer. And we have known each other now for quite a long time, and we have worked shoulder to shoulder during the pandemic. So Michael does a lot of things. Amongst other things, he is the president and CEO of ArtsFund, as you probably know. His leadership experience is both in for-profit and non-profit areas. And he has worked in everywhere from the US to India to mainland China. He has a BA in economics from Hampshire College, a master's in education, and let's just throw in an MBA from the Wharton School. He's a trustee of the Downtown Seattle Association, of Inspire Washington, of the Puget Sound Regional Council Economic Development District. Oh, that one's a mouthful, isn't it? Seattle Metropolitan Chamber, and the United Way of King County. So, do you ever sleep, Michael? I'm not fairly sure, probably does not. And his most recent position, prior to ArtsFund, was as the director of the Oregon Ballet Theatre. And prior to that, he spent 6 seasons with Ballet West as a professional ballet dancer. So it's with great pleasure I introduce my friend and treasured colleague, Michael Greer.
Excellent. How about another round of applause for Karin? Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. It is really my pleasure to be a part of this. I'm going off script here just for a little bit at the beginning because I was fortunate enough to see the event space, the hall earlier today, and I've got to say what a magical place that is going to be for this community when it is up and running. We're going to talk a little bit about what our data has shown is the power of having these types of spaces and arts and culture within our communities. But that is a very special space, and I am really just proud of everyone in this room for being a part of that and being here tonight. So I want to say thank you to all of you for making that possible. Karin, thank you for the introduction. I'm Michael Greer. I'm the president and CEO of ArtsFund, and I think we got the slide up there. First slide. Let's go ahead to the next slide here. So what is ArtsFund? ArtsFund, the next slide here. So what is ArtsFund? ArtsFund, our mission is to support the arts through leadership, advocacy, and grant making in order to build a more healthy, equitable, and creative Washington. We do that through a number of different methods. We've got 3 key pillars that we work with that are namely organizational health, inclusivity and equity, and youth and family engagement. We've been around for about 52 years, and some of the programs that kind of support those pillars of what make our mission, we conduct research studies. We've conducted 6 since the late 90s, of which you're going to hear a lot about our most recent study, which is the COVID Cultural Impact Study, from which we partnered with ArtsWA on a lot of that data collection, so thank you very much for that. We have supported, over that time, we've supported nearly 650 organizations with over $100 million in grants throughout the lifetime of the organization. And we have secured over $129 million for 262 capital projects, one of which is Field Events, Arts and Event Hall. And so we're very proud to be an advocate and a sponsor for that as well. You can go on to the next slide. If we're going to start with the idea of arts as a key economic driver. And I think it's really important for all of us to understand that the arts are a key economic driver at a national level, at a state level, and at a local community level. And we're going to get into some of those numbers here. But the arts provide a tax basis, they provide jobs, and they provide a lot of what I call kind of second-tier opportunities in terms of who has the contracts for the HVAC system at your arts hall, who is building the sets, who is doing a lot of the union contracted work behind the scenes. So there are a number of different economic impacts from having arts and culture in a community. Oh, got it. So is that better for everyone? Oh, just speak up next time if you can't hear me. So so we'll start with at a nationwide level. It's important to these are huge numbers. In 2020, these numbers come from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. The arts and culture had $876 billion of economic activity throughout the country. And that number is down significantly. I think in 2018-19, that number was far closer to $1 trillion. And the jobs created was at about 5.5. So you can see the impact of COVID over the past 2 years. But the key takeaway here is that this is an incredibly significant sector. And you can see it in comparison to some other major sectors that we just don't recognize all the time. But in terms of jobs and in terms of economic input, this is a sector that has significant impact throughout the country. When we're looking at Washington State, the impact is even more outsized. I think in the previous slide you could see that arts and culture contributed about 4.2% to national GDP. For state GDP, we're looking at about 10.3%, and that is at a almost $65 billion of economic activity and over 180,000 jobs. What I think is interesting, and Karin and I have talked about this ad nauseum, is the idea that we are one of the arts and culture's impact to the state's GDP is one of the largest in the countries. Yet, state and public funding per capita in the state of Washington is in the low 40s. We are one of the lowest. So we are constantly advocating for more public support given the amount of impact that this sector has in terms of our GDP. So I think that's just very important to remember. And yes, I understand that we are not in King, Pierce, Kitsap, or Snohomish County. We are not there, but the reason that I pull up this slide, a lot of our data comes from the Central Puget Sound, and what we have found is that the impacts that we're talking about on a national and a state level also apply to communities. And that includes things like extra tourism dollars, which we all know are part of the goals of the event hall that we're looking at right now. But also I think this $1 to $3 in terms of effects on our community is really important. We find that in most communities that we are surveying or where our data come from, $1 spent on a ticket provide $3 in community spending, and that can be in things like hotels, in parking, in restaurants. And I think that number is actually slightly smaller than what it should be because, as I mentioned before, it doesn't include all of the impact for who's got the cleaning crew, who is, again, supplying all the materials, who is doing the maintenance for the building or the maintenance on the ground. So these are all that would make that number, I think, closer to 1.4 or 1.5. But it's really important to remember that having an arts and cultural space and arts and cultural activity in your community does generate multiples of what you're putting into it. So let's talk a little bit about the social impacts. We did a survey back in 2019 that was called our social impact of the arts. And that looked at, as you might guess, the social impacts of arts in the similar regions. And what we found is not surprising, but the arts create a positive social impact in our communities, and they're really part of a toolkit that creates a better life, for a better quality of life for those in our communities. One of the things that we're recommending based off of our most recent findings is the idea that we rethink the role of arts and culture in our communities. So we really want to be thinking about, is it just about what is on stage and what is in our galleries, or is it about the arts and culture sector being a tool for creating more positive outcomes for our youth and for everybody in our community? And I'm going to show you why we think that is it is important to think about the role of arts and culture in the latter. Let's see. So if we're looking at, what does arts and culture do? They make people happy. And that may seem like a very simplistic statement, but we also know that happy communities have better social outcomes. They have better outcomes in terms of things like crime, employment, behavioral health. One of the questions that we asked in our latest survey was, why is it that you are engaging with the arts? Like, what is it? And the response was that it made me happy. And I think that that is just very important to recognize, that having an arts and culture space and having prominent arts and cultural opportunities for our citizens creates happiness. And that is something that is very important to our communities. When we look at numbers like 79% of people believe that arts and culture benefit their personal well-being. That is a huge number. And for people to be self-identifying at that high of a number, we find is very important. In addition, we asked a sampling of Washingtonians across the state. These were not specific arts people. These were just random Washingtonians, and over half of them said that they felt that cultural organizations were going to play a key role in their community's recovery. And I think that's really important, because these were individuals that many of them did not have a connection to arts and culture, but they felt that these institutions would be important to their community's recovery in the face of COVID and what we've seen over the past 2 years. So I think those are some important statistics about just the general social well-being factor that arts play. When we talk about youth development and education, there are two factors here that I think are really important. One is that there's been a lot of studies that are out there that really support the idea that having arts and culture as a treatment in schools or available to youth has positive outcomes just for them. But I also think it's important for us to recognize, when we're looking at 25, 50, 75 years down the road, the impact that we have now with our youth is going to set them up better when they grow up and when they become our future leaders, to understand what it is that is the positive impacts of arts. Right now, I feel like we spend a lot of time talking to adults that have not had a positive experience or any experience with arts and culture, and so we're starting kind of 3 steps behind. And if we are proactive in making sure that our youth understand and have an opportunity to engage with arts, by the time that they are the future decision makers, that it'll be easier to put some of these wonderful things that we're trying to get into our communities there. Some of the numbers that we look at, there's a 23% difference between at-risk students that have been involved with arts in terms of college education or college attainment. When you walk that back a little bit to something like high school graduation, we know that high school graduation rates have significant relationship with things like incarceration rates and with future wage earning. So the arts and culture are really a kind of a low entry point to making some significant changes with our youth and in the future of our communities. Another area that I think we'll talk a little bit more about during our panel discussion is the idea of arts in health and wellness. When we did this survey in 2018, 2019, we saw that 45% of medical institutions nationwide offered some type of arts program. And since then, there's been even more data that has come out that talks about the effects of engaging with arts and culture on things like pain relief. And I think we all know where the country is right now in terms of how we have been medicating for pain, and looking for alternative to relieve that is something that's very important. And there's a lot of other programs out there right now that are looking at non-medicated ways to have positive health impacts. And arts and culture is one way that we're doing that. I'm thinking of 2 programs in specific. One is Path with Art, which is an organization that is based out of Seattle that works with a lot of individuals that are facing a number of different traumas. But they have found that both neurologically and socially, they are seeing positive outcomes in their patients through things like painting and music and dance classes. And then the other program that I'm thinking of is Dance for Parkinson's, which is a fantastic program that is actually across the country. And they found that dance and movement for individuals with Parkinson's has a positive effect on their long-term outcomes. So this is a newer, I think, a newer field, but it's something that we're very interested in, and something just another benefit of having arts and culture in the community. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about COVID. I think that it's hard to have any discussion these days without talking about COVID, and all the benefits that we've been speaking of they've been significantly curtailed by what has happened over the past 2 years. And the arts and culture sector has been one of the hardest hit sectors, I think, of all the sectors across the country. And I know we are not alone in what has happened, but I think you'll be able to see here in a second just how devastating it has been for organizations and sectors that required people to come together in spaces. When we're looking at something like these charts, it's really hard to overstate the idea that in 2 years, the industry lost over 80%, nearly 80% of their earned income. And for anyone that runs a business or anyone that has been a part of a business, if you can imagine 80% of your earned income being taken away over a 2-year period, the fact that we're still here is significant, and it speaks to kind of the resilience of the sector. And you'll see the green line there that we did see a little bit of a bump in contributed income, which saved some of the sector, but overall, the ability to finance the impact that we've been talking about for the past 10 minutes here has been decreased by nearly 80%, and that has been incredibly devastating in a number of ways, not only to the organizations but also to the communities that they are trying to have impact in. One of the ways that that impact has shown has been through the layoffs and furloughs. Out of the organizations that we spoke with, 41% had laid off, furloughed, or reduced pay and hours for full-time staff. 41% is another just devastating number when you really think about it. There was a decline in 8,000 volunteer individuals, which I know in many of the smaller communities, the full-time staff is really only part of the story. It is that volunteer staff that drives a lot of the day-to-day work. And those numbers are not always captured in a lot of the economic data. So it was really important for us to recognize that 8,000 of those individuals were that had kind of exited the workforce. And we saw that a lot of them weren't coming back for a number of different reasons. And so we're very concerned right now about a kind of cultural brain drain within the sector. And when we're talking about coming back, we're talking about things like what is the reason that people are coming back into these spaces, and what are all of the factors that are keeping halls like this at 50% capacity, 60% capacity, 70% capacity. And when we did our research, we found that about 50% of people said that they were going to be coming back into spaces in the short and medium term. And so when our organizations are looking at, well, how are we budgeting for the next 1 to 3 years, they're really looking at how to come back into this market at a 50 or 60% capacity. And what we need are programs like Field Arts and Event Hall that are going to excite people to be back in these spaces. That is the type of inspiration that we need in order to get people off their couches and out of Netflix and all of that and back into these halls and these spaces and experiencing art and community in a shared space. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about why the recovery matters so much and what our physical spaces have to do with that recovery. The story that I want to tell here is that we saw the impact of the economic impact and the social impact of having arts and culture in a space. And over the past 2 years, we have seen a lot of that impact just kind of go away. And we really feel that the recovery is not, it's about the support that we are going to be giving to these organizations in order for them to recover, but it's also about us as a community supporting the sector that is going to support our own recovery. And if we want to see these benefits back in our communities and back in the lives of ourselves and our young people, then we are going to need to support them in ways that allow them to weather the next 1 to 3 years and the kind of tepid response that we're seeing as people get back into these spaces. And again, it's programs like this that are going to excite people to get back in these spaces, and it's going to be this type of programming that really makes a difference. And the other thing that I wanted to mention was the idea of space. We have all been, I think we saw somewhere around 70 to 80% of individuals that we spoke with said that they had or were planning to engage in some type of online or virtual interaction in terms of arts and culture. But there's nothing that replaces in-person contact. And there's nothing that that replaces the shared experience of being in a space and witnessing something like an arts and cultural event together. And so the ability for an organization and a community like Port Angeles to have a space to bring people together is incredibly important for the community's recovery, but it's also important to be able to put some of these new impacts into our community in ways that I don't think we've seen previously. I think people are being they're understanding the roles of arts and culture in a different way now than they did prior to the pandemic. And it's going to take spaces like this in order to bring people back and have them recognize what exactly it is that they had been missing. And so we talked a lot about what we would recommend and what is it that we can do today in order to support this sector, because I think that's why we're all here, is to try to support the sector and make sure that it is here to support us. The first recommendation that we have is to reimagine the role of arts and culture in our communities. And I alluded to this earlier in the presentation, but it's important to know that we need to be thinking about the role of arts and culture in a different way. It is not just what's on stage again. It is about it is an opportunity for us to reflect on ourselves, on our community, and to have another tool in our toolkits in terms of how we are making our communities a better place. That is really the role of arts and culture. Number two, we need to protect the cultural workforce. One of the things that I didn't talk about during the slide on the 41% reduction in the workforce was the idea that a lot of these jobs and a lot of these individuals are at the low wage and they are low wage earners for a lot of them, and they are some of the first to fall into the social safety net programs that we know are very difficult to get out of sometimes. And so it makes more sense for us to protect these jobs and protect these individuals before they fall into those areas. And we think that's very important. So protecting the cultural workforce as we look to the future for whatever shocks are next is very important. Third, center equity. Equity has a lot of different definitions that are out there right now, but I think it's important for us to understand that we need to support Black, Indigenous people of color. We need to support the rural communities that have been struggling a lot through the past 2 years. We need to be supporting the communities of disability, and not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because we understand that there are going to be new audiences that are going to be stepping into these spaces. When we know that 50% of the audiences are not coming back, well, how are we going to be filling those spots in the future? And we need to make sure that we are accessible and we are welcoming to new audiences as we reopen our doors. Number four, I wanted to say we need to support this long term. That is something that I think is very important, not just for arts and culture, but for us as a community. This is not a 6-month recovery. This is not a 9-month recovery. This is a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year. In some cases, it'll be a generational recovery when we're talking about what has been arguably lost for some of our youth and children. So this is something that while we're having a lot of these conversations today, we really need to take into the next 1, 3, and 5 years for sure. And then finally, we need to expand and sustain public support. This is something that I've been talking about quite a bit, but during the pandemic, we saw programs like the Paycheck Protection Program and the Shuttered Venues Operating Grant put in more money than individual philanthropy or corporate philanthropy could ever begin to think of. The federal, state, and municipal level dollars they just dwarfed anything that individual foundations can do. And so I think it's very important for us to continue to remind our decision makers and our elected officials and our lawmakers that that support mattered. It saved the sector. It did a lot for a lot of humans throughout this. And really to bring it down to that level, it's not just about a sector. It made the difference for a lot of people to be able to continue to work and to continue to put food on their plate and continue to keep a roof over their head. And I think it's very important that we remind them of that constantly, so that support is not just point in time when there's an emergency, but that we can continue that support so there's a foundation for whatever the next shock to this system or any of the systems will be. So with that, I'm just going to keep this up here while I say a couple thank yous. These are some of our other research studies that we've done over the years. But in closing, I just want to say that I think the impact of arts and culture in our communities is something that prior to the pandemic, perhaps we took for granted. And sometimes I say that it's okay that we took it for granted because it is such an ingrained part of who we are as humans. The way that we interact with each other and the way that we experience the world has a lot to do with art and culture. It has been a part of how we interact as a species for 100,000 years. I mean, it's just part of who we are. What happened over the past 2 years has kind of brought that to light. Not having the interactions and being starved for different types of interactions with humans has really, I think, brought arts and culture as a way to interact with people to the forefront of how we exist. And I think we need to keep that. And I think that, event spaces and programming in our community is a way to really highlight that moving forward and highlight the idea that coming together in these spaces is something that is about more than just a symphony or a ballet or an opera. It's an opportunity for us to reflect on ourselves and on our communities in a way that there is no alternative, in a way that is very human. So with that, I'm going to just say thank you to everyone for taking the time to listen to me ramble today, and we're going to turn it over to the panel for the panel or some respondents. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. Michael, now that you've given your keynote, we've asked 4 of our community members to be respondents to bring some of what Michael said and the message into our own community and our own perspective, and also to ask Michael some questions. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Christine Lowy of Port Angeles Fine Arts Center.
Hi, thank you. Yes, so my name is Christine Lowy. I am the executive director of the Port Angeles Fine Arts Center. I have been there for about 1 year now, almost exactly. In coming into this organization during a very interesting time in life and going through the pandemic, I think the primary goal that I had in coming into that organization was to reinvigorate the programs that we had and get the doors open again, and seeing a real hunger in what you're explaining about the insulation of going into COVID, and that real hunger to come back out and reconnect, and the vital importance that art has for allowing us to make those connections. So for me, it was really important that we think about art beyond just something that we look at on the walls, but how does it build connection in our community and bring people together. So I really appreciate, in looking at the research and what you're describing, that we're very aligned. And I think what we already know is that, the presence of art, as you've stated in the research, is that it improves neighborhood vitality, it builds community cohesion, and it promotes social well-being. So that really resonated with me. That's very much in line with what we're trying to do at the Arts Center. The other piece that resonated in looking through the research beyond this presentation as well was the importance of building cross-sector partnerships. And for me, all of the work that we've been doing is how do we build partnership with other people in the community? There is no way for us to do this without finding those opportunities to build capacity with one another. We are a small community, so we can't do it alone. And I know as a tiny organization, I can't do it alone. So I appreciate all of those opportunities to bring my community together and bring those partners together. My curiosity and question to you, one of the things that I was asked was to present a question at the end here. So my question to you is, out of that research, was there any key indicators that you have to give us wisdom on for allowing those sustained cross-sector partnerships? What do you see as the difference between best of intentions and the ability to really sustain that over the long term?
Thank you. I asked Michael to wait until the end so we can hear from all 4 respondents. So Colleen McAleer, I have, let me advance the slide. Colleen McAleer is with the Clallam County Economic Development Council.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for coming out and speaking with us today. I really appreciate this. You know, I think everybody recognizes that the Field Arts and Events Hall is going to be absolutely a transformational asset for not just Port Angeles, but also Clallam County. Some of the things I really think about a lot and worry about as I look through the answers to the 508 respondents that took our surveys that we gave out at grocery stores, trying to get a very randomized sample, was that everyone's biggest concern by far was the lack of housing. And that's especially for younger people, whether they're at the 50th percentile of median income or 200th percentile of median income. That's just a massive challenge today. So I know that the social impacts, I think it's kind of self-evident how important the arts and culture industry is, but I want to make sure we're very thoughtful about how this incredible asset is going to be very transformational. But how do we ensure that as the city of Port Angeles does grow, which it will, and it will thrive, but very likely for the population that is very well off and retirees. So how do we bring in those opportunities and jobs for people across the spectrum, speaking of that equity component? And then so those are, my thoughts as you were speaking, Michael. But my big question for you, what I was really curious about after listening to your presentation, is that the national average, I think you said, was 4.3% in arts and culture, but in our state is 10.2. So math, 2.45 times higher in our state. And I'm really wondering what's driving that. Why is our state so much higher than the national average? So thank you, and again, thanks for coming out tonight.
Thank you, Colleen. Our next respondent we'll hear from is Dr. Michael Maxwell from the North Olympic Healthcare Network.
Hello, Michael. Oh, getting your face shot. Hi, another Michael. Yeah, so I'm actually from the sector that's actually the top of the state, apparently, for economic for GDP. So I'm a family physician by training and the CEO of a community health center here in Port Angeles. I'm also a musician of limited talents, and that's why I'm making my career in medicine rather than in the arts. But the reason I have an interest, my interest in the arts extends beyond my personal interest, but rather I'm fascinated by the intersection of arts and healthcare. And I was particularly struck by some of what you're talking about, with the impacts that research around pain and arts therapy. I think this really resonates. There's also quite a bit of data. I'm not sure if you are familiar with any of the details, but about the connection between arts and connectedness. And we understand that so much depression, suicide, substance use disorder, a lot of social dysfunction comes from this, or stems from a loss of social connectedness. And that's why I feel fairly strongly that community health is, it's more than just your physical health. It's physical, behavioral. Wendy will talk about that here, I'm sure. Emotional, and actually a cultural health that's essential for this full sense of happiness and well-being and social connectedness. And it makes sense that as we improve our involvement in the arts, that our general happiness, both as a community and individually, will improve. But the question I have, so I've spoken with some of my other physician colleagues, and I was struck by more than once a perspective which surprised me, and this actually gets a little bit to what Colleen was talking about as well. I had more than one say they felt the optics were wrong, stepping over somebody living in the streets as they're on the way to the box office, and they had a hard time reconciling how to support the arts, and almost some guilt over how can I enjoy the arts when this crisis is going on around us. And I had my own perspectives and responses, but I'd be really curious about yours. The quick response is the economic development that you referenced. Certainly that will raise all boats and eventually can help all those around. And implicit in that perspective that was voiced is that somehow investment in the arts comes at the expense of or in lieu of other social investments. And I don't believe the data supports that, but I'd be curious if what your thoughts are. Thank you.
Thank you. And Marty Brewer is our final respondent, and then Michael will get the mic back to answer these questions.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the presentation tonight. It was very energizing, and I appreciate it. As the school superintendent of the Port Angeles schools, we know as a community we invest greatly in the education or the arts of education in the Port Angeles school system. As we know, or as most of us probably know, the local funded EP&O funds the entire art program for the Port Angeles schools, or any school. So the state of Washington doesn't recognize in the funding model for school systems the arts, which is a big problem. So, when you start talking about equity and, the contention that we're seeing across our state and across the United States and taxes, EP&O levies are critical to continue to support the arts and other programs within public school systems. So I think we've got a bigger issue there that we need to address as a system. But the one thing that resonated with me today was, under your recommendations, the statement around reimagine the role of arts and culture in our communities. I've only been here for 4 years, so I'm still a newcomer. I know I'm still going to be a newcomer until I'm here for 25 years. That's just the way Port Angeles works. And that kind of concurs with my statement here. Port Angeles is very historically based. And so how we've always done things is really important in this community, and I think that's great. But with the field hall coming on board, I can't tell you how many times I've been asked why, when we have Port Angeles High School with a performing arts center that's state of the art. I have supported that in every conversation that I've been a part of, because I think it's much needed, and it is an economic stimulus package for our community, and it's what we stand for in Port Angeles. So I think there needs to be, and I'd like to know from you, is other communities that have kind of had to not rebrand but rethink how they sell it, because Port Angeles High School and our auditorium has been a key part of the arts in our community, and it's not going to go away. And how can we help our community, not me, but how can we help our community understand how each can complement one another? moving forward to work together to give a great experience to all students and all communities or all patrons of our community. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you so much. Those are all really fantastic questions, and some are much larger than any of us in this room. But I think we all have a part to play in some of the answers. I'm going to start with Christine, and because it ties into a couple of the questions here. We had questions about partnerships, homelessness, and what I remember is the guilt of supporting arts and culture, and the why, maybe. And I think that what's really important for us to remember, and I'm going to also kind of address your question, Ms. Brewer, about other examples of how we look at this. But the arts are part of a package that needs to be supported in order to improve quality of life. And I think that we need to be thinking about arts and culture and our support for arts and culture in terms of its role in that package. I think if we focus linearly or, in kind of a forced ranked model for absolute support or 100% support for any one outcome, we're going to fail. And I think we've seen that in a lot of different ways. I was at an event with the mayor of Seattle the other day, and he was talking about arts and culture, and he was talking about homelessness because he's been asked this question multiple times, right? And one of his responses was that, people need to be able to self-actualize, whether they're on the street or whether they're under a roof. And that idea that we need to create a package of opportunities for the people in our community that, yes, make sure that they are housed, make sure that they are fed, make sure that they have employment opportunities, and make sure that they have a reason for being. And I think that that is kind of where arts and culture fall into all of this. So kind of to respond to some of that, I think that we need to be looking not at individual kind of surgical ways of approaching specific problems, but we need to look at what are the factors and what is the package of opportunities that create a better quality of life for everyone in our community. And if we can fund that and fund it proportionally, and I don't think that we should be giving all of our money to arts and culture or all of our money to any one specific thing, but we need to be thinking about arts and culture as a part of the solution. And that's where we come in with our recommendation of revisioning the role. It's not, and I hate to say this, stepping over someone in order to go to the opera. That's not really what it is. It's what is the other roles that arts and culture are playing in order to perhaps create a better outcome for that individual once he or she is off the streets, and making sure that they have a community that they can live in and feel actualized in. And so I think that it's very important for us to just think of the role that arts and culture has within that. It was a great question. What is driving the Washington 10.8 GDP? And I think that, Colleen, you mentioned that there's a lot of specific factors. The film industry is one of them, and film has been historically it's been a very advantageous part of arts and culture here in Washington State, and there's a lot of discussions on how we can keep that here and keep it from moving across the border and up north, and there's a lot of discussions for that. But this is an artistically rich community. I mean, when you really think of communities across the country that have as many different arts and cultural offerings as Seattle, you're really only struck by a few. I mean, you think of places like San Francisco or New York or possibly Boston, but Seattle is one of the great art towns. And when you think of music, you think of the history of music in Seattle, and a lot of people tend to forget that that is part of the arts and culture scene, right? I mean, our history of music within the state is really prominent, not just nationally but internationally. So I think those are some of the reasons why we have such a high contribution to GDP for arts and culture. But it is important to realize that it's not recognized enough in terms of per capita spending. So we could dig into that probably more for days, but I think those are some of the reasons that Washington tends to be higher than other states. And I'll say, let's see. I want to talk I'll end on the idea of partnerships. When we're thinking about the role of arts and culture as a part of a package, the question of partnerships becomes less, I think, it becomes more obvious. And the partnerships with the health community, or partnerships with education, or partnerships with economic development, it becomes a much more obvious tool to put into some of these conversations. I sit on a lot of boards where people would say, well, why is an arts CEO sitting on an economic development board? Well, it's because this study, I sit on the Puget Sound Regional Development Board, and they actually took the workforce component of the study that we just did around COVID, and are putting additional dollars to that to try to tease out what they're trying to tease out a little bit more of what those workforce components are and what the effect was within Greater Puget Sound. And so I think when you start to ask yourself, how does arts and culture fit into all of the other things that we're doing, the idea of partnerships becomes it's a no-brainer. There really should be an arts component to most of the sectors that are out there, or most of the conversations that we're having, or at least we should be asking, is there a way that arts and culture can play a positive role in this? So I think are we ready for panel? Yeah? All right. I hope I got to everyone's questions. All right, perfect.
We're going to continue with a panel discussion. We'll roll right into it, so bear with me while I MC, stage manage, and stage crew all at the same time. So thank you, Michael. And Michael will roll on to the panel with us, so we're not done hearing answers from Michael. First, I want to invite up Terry Ward, who's going to be the moderator. Here's your seat, Terry, so you can come on up. Terry Ward is the current publisher of the Peninsula Daily News. Terry joined Sound Publishing as a group publisher of the Olympic Peninsula News Group in September 2015, and was appointed regional publisher in April 2016, adding Sound Classifieds and the Kitsap News Group to the list of publications he leads. I'm going to invite up Frances Charles. Frances Charles has served on tribal council for Lower Elwha Clallam for the past 29 years. She served 19 years as tribal chairwoman, and in her lifetime, Frances has worked with the Olympic National Forest Service, devoting 12 years of service working with fire crews, helicopter manager, and earning her way to one of the top crew women leaders for our area. Through her commitment to her people and the traditional values, she played a vital role in the recovery and preservation of Siwit Zen, one of the largest archaeological digs in the Northwest. Wendy Sisk is a licensed behavioral health counselor with 25 years of experience. She has served many roles at Peninsula Behavioral Health over the past 19 years and is currently the CEO. Wendy has a strong background in geriatric mental health and crisis intervention services, and she's committed to making our community a great place to thrive. Nathan West. Nathan is currently our city manager at Port Angeles. Prior to taking his position, Nathan was responsible for the Community and Economic Development Department of the city. Before coming to Port Angeles area, Nathan managed the Policy Development section of Cayman Islands Government Planning Department. The last person who's on the panel is myself. My name is Stephen Rader Ginsberg, and my background is in theater and directing performing arts centers. I am the executive director of Field Arts and Events Hall, and I'm going to give the mic over to Terry. We have two mics, so if we get the other one up on stage, maybe, Jamie, you could give that, just hand it over to Terry. Terry's going to continue the conversation. And Karin gave a wonderful bio to Michael, so I'm not going to repeat that.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a few questions to this group. And Steve and I had a conversation last week, and I think you presented to this group that we were going to kind of dive into the deep end and stay there. So it was alluded to earlier about the cost associated with building the field hall and the fact that there's all of these issues going on in Clallam County right now. There's, food insecurity, mental health crisis, addiction, substance abuse, the affordable housing that Colleen mentioned earlier. All of these issues, but then you put out there this $60 million price tag. What would you kind of say to your critics, and how do we answer that for the critics of folks that would say, hey, you're spending all this money. Could that money be used better somewhere else?
Yeah, I'll start, and then just let me know who wants to follow up. Not 60, but 50 in terms of the
I upped it a little bit.
I mean, inflation is a real thing. So, but what I will say, the genesis of Field Arts and Events Hall was Donna Morris, and Donna Morris is a woman who passed away, and in her will, she left over $9 million, and it had restrictions to it. It had to be the design and build of a performing arts center in Port Angeles, and one that would support arts organizations that exist and bring in new national and international talent. So with those restricted funds, there became a community project with a number of advisors from 9 organizations that were pulled together through that process to design and build and thinking of what Port Angeles needed. I had the real fortune to speak with Dan Wilder Jr., who is a board member, not Junior, sorry, Dan Wilder Sr. Also had the privilege to speak with Junior. But Dan Wilder Sr., before he recently passed away, and he met me when I was interviewing for this job. One of the things that Dan Wilder, he pulled me aside and he said, we overbuilt and we overspent, but we did it because of purpose. We knew that we needed a conference center in town, and we were told by people that we had to have this conference center for the economic development and the future of Port Angeles. He said we wanted this to be state-of-the-art. We didn't want to build something that in a few years would be too small or not good enough for what Port Angeles will become. So I was really motivated by that and thought, we are building something and we're future-proofing it. We're trying to get ahead of the curve with Field Arts and Events Hall to provide for this community not only what we need now, but what we will continue to need. And I said $9 million was restricted, but there's been much more. There's a fund that Michael is very involved with called Building for the Arts. And Building for the Arts is a Washington state fund that can only be used for arts capital projects. And if we don't have it in Port Angeles, it's going to go to somebody else. So I'll say that Field Arts and Events Hall is out there competing for dollars for Port Angeles, for our benefit, and we could never get that. We've gotten over $3 million from Building for the Arts. We could never get that as a community and allocate it towards homelessness or housing or mental health. It has to go for the arts. So that's just part of we will get there to the final price tag, and most of that money is restricted and has to be used for arts. And why is it that way? And I think Michael gave a lot of compelling arguments about why our government and why there are money and there is stimulus money out there for the arts because of the benefits that it ripples out and brings to the rest of our community. I think I'll pass to Nathan.
Thanks, Steve. I think it's a great question, Terry, and I think it's important just to share the 17 years that I've been here in the city of Port Angeles. I think it's really important to recognize that every single one of those years, this community has had a substantial challenge to address. there is always going to be a new challenge that we need to tackle locally. Today it's housing, today it's homelessness, but we could spend an eternity dumping into those short-term problems and not thinking about the future. And to me, that's why this project is so important, because it is an investment in our future generations of this community. It recognizes that if we are wanting to see change different from the status quo, something that raises the self-esteem of this community, something that makes a long-term difference for the generations to come, and that really thinks about our youth, I think this is a major step forward. It will bring a quality that I am confident is going to bring a great deal of appreciation for the arts world from our youth in this community, and I think that couldn't be more critical to developing balanced individuals that participate in this community moving forward. So it's a really worthy investment when you think about it, and we can't just afford to continue only to focus on those short-term problems that happen from year to year. And I'm not suggesting we ignore them. We have to tackle those as well.
Anybody else?
I'd like to say that it was an opportunity for us. It was something that we had partnered on earlier on with the marina development that was taking place at Hollywood Beach, and that aspects of it. But it's something tourism-wise, economic-wise, that we had taken a look at it in the long run to partner with the Arts and Field in regards to the hotel, in regards to the longhouse structures, bringing into tourism. We see what happens in Victoria. In 2025, we're going to be hosting a canoe journey here, but that's something that we want to see culturally, because the arts cultural realm of it, culture in many ways means a different thing for the native tribes. But it's something that we transpired and really looked at on how can we enhance the tourism here, but also having an opportunity with the economics within the tribe to be a partner in different ways. Yes, it's been very challenging, and we're all in a survival mode. We are all in a survival mode because of the COVID. It really set us back, not only with our families, with our communities, with the elders, with the veterans, and all of the families that are out there. And it's something that we're taking a look at. We're readjusting some of our programs. We had to subsidize because our economics were shut down on our reservation with our casino. We are now expanding our casino from 10,000 square foot to 22,000 square foot. And with the governmental aspects of it, they subsidize for us, but it's an opportunity that we see here, and it is going to be challenging. It is going to be very challenging for all of us, for the youth, for the behavior health matters that we've dealt with in different areas, but it's something that we see that we have to take these steps forwards again, and we know the risks that we have to partner in those areas.
Great. My understanding is there are some papers on the table, correct, Steve? And some pens. And if you have any questions that you would like to ask, I believe you'll pick those up and they'll shuffle them to me. And that way I'm not the only one up here asking questions of the panel. You have that ability as well right there where you're sitting. So fill those out and send them up this way. He tells me I get to choose whether or not your question gets asked, so compliment me along the way. So as we get into this, I want to continue to ask some questions about economic development, and then I want to get into the social aspect of all of this. So as we look at the economic development, and we talked about the affordable housing, and I want to keep drilling in on some of these issues. You know, we have this beautiful building, two beautiful buildings going on downtown, a lot of development. What can the city do and this group do to ensure that it doesn't begin to price out small businesses from downtown, and that there's still the ability for affordable housing to be in the downtown area? What's the plans there, Nathan? I'll put you on the spot here.
Thanks, Terry. I think that's really important because we're all seeing a tremendous growth in the demand for housing in this community when we already had a housing crisis here locally. I think, to me, there's a lot of hope in what we see in the future. I think it's important to share with this group that we know today we have over 512 different units in process right now, many of those in construction that are moving forward. And so we are making some changes in the direction of solving the housing problem. But there's a lot more to do. I think it's interesting to think back just a few years ago when really one of our significant housing crisis challenges was that there was no market in Port Angeles. And today we have a significant market as far as we can construct something and ultimately there will be a demand for actually purchasing it. So I think that's something that is different. And it has changed many times relative to what our needs are. But I think a huge part of that is the city's focus on recognizing we need to focus on permanent housing need. We need to find every way that we can to pave the way for additional units in this community by looking at policy changes and ways through the zoning code that we can actually enable more development of our limited land base in this community. And I think City Council very much has done that as to the different ordinances that they've passed recently, the fact that we've taken advantage of every single legislative opportunity out there that's been provided by the state relative to housing need. And it's important, too, to recognize the critical nature of partnerships. Wendy, sitting next to me, is one of the partners of the city in housing that stepped up to work on the All-View Motel. And I think it's important that we're going to continue to see some great things to come out of the various partnerships and the investments that we're making in the long-term policy relative to housing.
I'll just dovetail what Nathan was saying. The other thing that's happening is the county's created a county-wide group to talk about housing. And Colleen sits on that group with me, Nathan sits on that group with me, and really looking at affordable housing, but really looking at the housing spectrum and recognizing it's not about money entirely. It's not about policy entirely. There are just a lot of factors that are going to go into solving the current housing crisis. And, you know, little projects like the All-View Motel can have a big impact. We're targeting the lowest income homeless folks. If you have a reasonable income right now, it's really hard to find housing. If you are, you know, on Social Security, if you're disabled, it is near impossible to find housing. So it's going to take us looking at the housing spectrum from, you know, individual single-family homes to multifamily homes to looking at, you know, some of the policy around short-term rentals. And it's a complex problem. We're not going to solve it anytime soon. But know that there are a lot of partnerships happening right now, recognizing that for our community to thrive, the first thing people need is a place to lay their head at night. And I think we're going to continue to see that evolve over time. And I think we're going to see a lot of significant impacts over the next 3 to 5 years.
Great, thank you. Michael, you mentioned earlier, and I was looking at your recommendations, and your number one recommendation was reimagine the roles of arts and culture in the community. How? How can Port Angeles do that to where people kind of have a different view?
Well, I think the conversations that we're having today is a great start. And being able to have these conversations where we have other city leaders and decision makers that are with our arts leaders and our arts event space leaders and talking about the role of arts and culture within the context of community health. I think the conversation is where it starts. I'm not going to pretend like I know the history or, you know, the intricacies of the details of what it takes to solve some of these problems for Port Angeles specifically. But I will say that what we're recommending is that in these conversations about community health, that you have representation and conversations with arts and culture involved. And I think that's the place to start. What does Field Arts and Events Hall, what does it do to some of the issues that we've been talking about? How is it connected to some of these positive outcomes? And I think having that conversation is a way for us to reimagine, like we're saying, the role of arts and culture. Steve?
I think to add on to that, I know Field Arts and Events Hall has 500-seat theater. And when we bring in an artist, when we bring in a conversation, when we partner with our tribal brothers and sisters bringing in work on the stage, that shows and will communicate to 500 people. And to me, in a size of town like Port Angeles, when we have 500 people engaged in a conversation, and then they go home and they talk to 2 more people, that's 1,500 people who's brought in. That's a significant percentage of our population in the area. So when we have a focal point that we can bring in, say, in some past work that I've done, a Ugandan refugee has created a story with music, and it was really about trauma and overcoming trauma and being a refugee and having to learn a new life in this country, not only through music and song and story, but in real meaningful way in which that artist then went into the schools, that artist went into our communities, talked to our refugee populations, and that entire conversation helped to imagine how we can, 1, talk to each other, not only imagine, but really start to do it, but 2, imagine a sense of resiliency and then come through that together so that we're a stronger community. And the benefits of that, I think what Wendy was talking about, it's complex, it's complicated. So how do we change zoning laws? How do we work together? How do we fix up or clean up a neighborhood? How do we have more access to places that have been guarded or more closed? It's about being together as community, and Field Hall will give a space and will allow those conversations to grow very organically, but I think quickly, as our numbers will be large.
Got a couple questions from the group here. And the first one, and I'm going to talk about what the potential for high operating cost of arts facilities. What strategies can be used to balance sustainable and attractive programming with keeping event ticket prices affordable for the average working class family?
I just asked Steve this question earlier, so I'm going to turn it over to him.
Well, so there's many ways to come into that. Some of it is increased philanthropy. Some of it is when we have a healthy budget as Field Arts and Events Hall, then we have the ability to be inclusive and dynamic with our pricing. And I truly believe that Clallam County having 79,000 people and Jefferson County having another 50 or so thousand people, and having a facility such as Field Hall, we are going to, our service area is from Forks to Port Townsend and to Victoria. Victoria citizens and Canadian citizens will come over to see artists that are not getting Canadian visas for performance. So that natural barrier includes a desire to come over. So all of that being said, I'm really, there shouldn't be any concern about attracting and filling those seats, but I do hear the concern about how do we have access to pricing so that it will be affordable. There are ways in which we can work with the library to have tickets that can be checked out to come in, so that just like you can access books, DVDs, CDs, you should be able to access a performance at Field Arts and Events Hall. That can happen through National Endowment for the Arts. Again, it goes back to sort of one of those things that I said is there are funds and there are monies out there, statewide, federally. And if Port Angeles has access to it through the new programs being developed, we will be able to bring in that benefit and subsidize tickets. We are looking at programming that is free every day, doing an educational programming, so having music and lectures and participatory drumming and painting, all of that can happen really in a way that we can raise the funds so it doesn't have to be astronomically expensive to have, Beauty and the Beast with 200 people on our performance stage. We can have a visual artist with some easels and some canvases, and we can have a drummer with a few drums, spreading the art, spreading the joy, and really creating that artistic experience.
So you mentioned, Michael, earlier that 71% of at-risk students with high arts involvement attend college. So thinking in terms of what Steve just answered here about getting more at these, because high risk, sometimes there's so many reasons why they're high risk, right? Some of it's economic, some of it's social, some of it's their entire background, right? How do you get more of those folks involved in arts through the school district using Field Hall?
Well, I'll let Steve answer specifically to Field Hall, but I will say that what Superintendent, you were talking about, making sure, this gets back to the advocacy question, making sure that we are advocating for legislation and programs that fund art in our schools, that in turn will fund them and our young people visiting and experiencing events at places like Field Arts Hall. And you know, that is very important, but I also think that having access is very important. A lot of times there are a multitude of reasons that we find why at-risk or certain communities do not enter art spaces, and it's not always economic. Actually, very often it's not economic. It has to do with the history of who and how people have been welcome in those spaces, and that is something that I think we're talking about a lot as communities, and making sure that the spaces are open and welcoming. We were talking earlier today about the public nature of Field Arts and Events Hall, and I think that's very important, that it is a public space. The doors are open, and people can come in without having to put on a tuxedo or having to put on a suit and tie. And once the community, once youth understand, once the families of often underprivileged individuals understand that that space is for them, then it becomes easier for them to become part of that 71%. And Steve, I'll let you speak to kind of the specifics. But
I'm going to answer shortly because I think Wendy and Francis also have some insight on this. Because we're not just creating Field Arts and Events Hall. The vision is the Port Angeles Waterfront Center. So I envision that we are going to accomplish an arts, culture, and science campus. So that in terms of education, I can't wait until Marty and I and Francis and Melissa get to sit down together and talk about a day in which our students come down and get to participate in an arts education program, a cultural experience at the Cultural Longhouse, and then go to the Marine Discovery Center to experience science learning about our sound and our freshwater program. But one of the things, it was very important to start right away after I got here. I met Marty in my interview process, and we've designed a program called Peninsula Performs. With Peninsula Performs, we're working with artists who are living here on the peninsula, who will get paid to go in to classrooms, K through 12 classrooms, and give an experiential lesson on the arts that tie into our national and state core curricular standards. So it's not just give an arts experience because it's an add-on or extra for that kid who doesn't know how to do math but gets it when they play the djembe and they start learning how to count in rhythm. That kid is going to start passing that test. And when the teacher who has the ultimate control of saying, I want that drumming artist to come in the third week of February because that's when our kids have to know it, they'll have the freedom and the agency to do that. So we'll be in the community, in our schools, as well as being a resource for children to come to our center. And this is one thing that excites me is that Field Arts and Events Hall is not just a performance center. It is a community education arts access center. So we are going to integrate education to all of our arts experiences as well as arts-only experiences. So let me pass this on.
One of the avenues that we've talked about in-house as well is sharing the knowledge of who we are and where we come from. Because today there's still many people out there that don't even realize that Lorelwa exists, and we're 6 miles out. And those are the challenges that we have, is to continue on with those education realms of it. But we've also talked about bringing in our relations from Canada. We see a lot of the dances and the songs and the culture and the artwork that comes with it. But really outreaching to our youth and giving them the opportunity to show what they learn, but also to show and have them learn the experiences that they have with the art, and having the opportunity to interact in that manner. But I do need to say that my parents always told me I lived in two worlds, and I didn't understand that until later in my life because of my cultural sides and because of the Wanitam side, is the non-native side of it. And it's challenging for us, for the tribes, because again, at times we have to compete with some of these grants, and we're not competitive and allowed to have a few of the grants, and that's why we partner a lot of the times, because we're able to succeed in that manner. So I run a tribal government. We're a self-governant tribe. We receive funded resources from the feds and the states, and we have a self-governance compact. And at times we're very competitive in that manner, but we look for ways that we can partner. And these are the avenues of one thing that we looked at is how can we look at the future of our tribes for the future generations, the 7 generations that we have. And we neighbor with a lot of our neighboring tribes, or we partner with them in many ways. I've talked with Quileute, Makah, and all of the others in regards to bringing them here so that we can do a show and tell basically, and really partner in that manner, because we're rich. We have the culture. It's not about the value of the money. It's about the culture. And how do you express that in many ways? We worked a lot with the school district on the COVID time, and really give my hands up to Marty to partner with us in that manner because of the sacrifices our kids went through with the COVID, and being able to partner with the computers that he utilized for our students and sent the buses out to our areas, so it's doable. We taught a lot of our classes online for the cultural parts of it. We did the educational outreach online for our elders that were in the depression and their isolations. So it's something that we can do through the satellite systems of the technologies today and partner in all kinds of different avenues. Thank you.
Wendy, hang on to that microphone. We focused a lot on economic development and a lot of things, and so I want to drive in the last few minutes we have. I want to talk about the social side of things. There was some, in the presentation earlier, it talked about people equate arts with just their well-being and the happiness. And I'd like you to speak a little bit on that side of things, of kind of in the involvement with PBH and the social side of the arts.
You guys have a couple hours, because I can't. Okay, so that's a big question. It's huge. One of the things that stands out to me first and foremost is, Michael, you spoke about connectedness. And did you know that having a sense of connection, a strong sense of connection with a core group of people, is one of the things that determines longevity? We live longer. We live longer if we feel connected to our community. We seek out the arts that bring us joy. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes, if you're depressed, you might choose the music that makes you feel more so for a while and feed yourself a little bit of that. But most of us will eventually find our way to the thing that starts to lift our mood. And we use art in a lot of ways in the behavioral health field, whether it's drum groups, which thank you for our Native American partners for introducing us to that in our field. We use drumming groups for people with dementia and other neurocognitive disorders. We use drumming groups for people with schizophrenia. We do drumming groups with kids so that they get that sense that they can be a part of something bigger than themselves. We do art groups where we're focusing on art therapy. People can sometimes express themselves through art, whether it's painting or music or drawing or sculpture, in a way that they don't have words to express. And sometimes when we're holding those hard feelings inside, it just kind of festers and eats away at us. And so through the arts, people have the ability to sometimes express that, get it out, make it something that's tangible that they can then manage in a more effective way in their life. So the arts has a significant impact across socioeconomic status, across culture. There's art in all cultures, and there's a reason for it. And some people would say it feeds your soul, it feeds the spirit, but it's something that we can all connect to on a really primal level that sometimes can help us get dislodged from a place where we're really stuck. And so we see a lot of value in the arts. And I was giving Steve a hard time when we met, and I said, so are you going to have the ability for my folks to come and do some volunteer work to earn seats at a show, or how are we going to do that? How do we connect our social programs with the arts programs in the community? How do we make sure that this is accessible equitably across our whole community? And I really have faith that we're going to be able to do that and do that effectively to make our community a better place. We know that the arts help us grow in so many ways. Everyone in here has a favorite song. You don't have to tell me what it is. You probably have a favorite artist, a favorite painter that you love. There's probably a play that you've seen. And those are memories that stick with us. And when we're in a tough time, sometimes we're able to lean on that as well.
So one of the questions that was presented to me here was, do we lose something that is critical to who we are as human beings when there isn't the arts?
You guys, when are there not the arts? Anybody ever sat in a meeting with me? I doodle nonstop. I don't sit still well. This is the longest I've sat still without something to do with my hands for a long time. And I doodle all the time. I'm not a good artist. I don't have those skills. I have lots of other skills. But everywhere you look around you are little bits and pieces. And I think that as a community, I'm looking at Peninsula Fine Arts. You know where one of my clients' favorite places is in this town? The Art Walk. You guys been out there? If not, you should go. So I think that we find art in nature. I think we find art throughout our communities in ways large and small. And I think that sometimes we just can't see it, but it's always there around us when we're ready to find it.
So you're saying you don't need Field Hall to...
I'm not saying
kidding.
That,
no.
But I think that it's important to recognize that Field Hall is just the natural evolution for our community. Absolutely. To take art to the next level.
And the last question here, and I have to ask it. It has to do more with the. Well, there's two. One, real quick, if somebody could talk about parking. I had a note that just said parking. I think we know what that is, meaning where are people going to park when they're down there?
So parking's a great question. It's actually, for me, a good memory to this hall where I think we've probably had many downtown parking meetings about Port Angeles and where we go from here. I think one important element is recognizing that we're working very closely with Annie and Shores, who is Mr. Eric Dupar, and recognizing that he is working towards over 300 spaces in a parking structure across the street. I think that's really going to help the community recognize that we're taking care of parking. There's going to be some great options there for attending the event and ultimately making sure there's adequate parking in the downtown. I do think it's important to share when it comes down to the abundance of parking in the downtown, whether you feel this is the reality or not, you boil it down and there are 21 days out of the year where we have a parking challenge in the downtown, and that's it. And for the most part, we have more than adequate parking throughout our downtown area.
21 days out of the year, yet I've been in more than 21 meetings over the last year that have talked about parking. So reimagining, we talked about that earlier, reimagining, who should be involved in that process to reimagine what arts look like?
The simple answer is everybody. And that seems like a cop-out, but it is true because, and I could not have said it any better than you, where there is not a day, there is not a second that goes by that arts is not driving some form of interaction that we have with our community, with each other, with ourselves, our own inner monologues, our own the way that we do everything. So, and that goes for every single human being. And I really want to hammer home that point. Like, this is part of who we are as humans, and we have been making cave paintings and all that stuff since we first became aware of ourselves. So who needs to be involved? Absolutely everybody. It gets back to the partnership question. It needs to be our elected officials. It needs to be our donors and our patrons. It needs to be our youth. It needs to be our tribal communities. It needs to be our healthcare professionals. It needs to be every single aspect, because the arts does intersect with everybody in different ways. And so the toughest part of all of this is being able to connect with everybody and finding those through lines. And I think that's what Field Arts Hall does. It creates a space to bring all of this, because we're all dealing with our interactions on a daily basis, whether it's the way we look at nature, or the car that we buy, or the paint that we decide for our house. But event spaces like this bring a focal point for us to start asking some of these questions and have the larger conversations. I don't know if you want to.
So that leads to the how, right? You talked about who needs to be involved, the how. So beyond that, just the how do you get them more invested in the process beyond just meetings like this?
Get them in the spaces. Go see art and culture. Identify it in the way that the conversations like this start a process, I feel, in people to look at how they're engaging with art every day. And then that becomes the how. So if you recognize that your shoes are fantastic and they are an artistic choice, right? And that there was an artist that created those, and there was an artist that made a specific choice in order to put those together, then you start to recognize the artistic decisions that are happening all around you every day. And then these conversations and the who become the how.
You complimented my shoes. I have no more questions. I'll let Steve wrap up.
I want to request the last word on this question, as this is our final question. So would anybody, Francis, Wendy, Nathan, like to?
I think a lot of it itself, again, is the partnerships, but continuing on with your discussions with one another. I get questioned at just as well on the arts and cultural parts of it, but really that's our heritage, that's our history, and really elaborating outside the community to have those conversations, to be able to share those stories, to be able to share the knowledges that our elders and our community members have to finish that task. But what is really there that gives them an opportunity to really provide the history of who we are and where we come from, but having them feel those ownerships, having them be involved in the realm of it just as well, and step outside the box, take that chance, and work forward to what they feel is better for their future generations, and having the opportunities that they can continue down that task with.
So Francis mentioned the history, and I think that's so important that we recognize how long this entire community has just been engaged in art. And to me, this community has been involved in art in a way that has started the ball rolling relative to placemaking within downtown Port Angeles. And I think where I see that is you can look at the many culturally significant murals that we have in downtown, and historically significant murals in downtown. We have a long history of engaging in ways where art is storytelling, where art is communicating to our residents, to our visitors, and really engaging in ways that changes us from a place that people just want to pass through to a place that's a destination. And I frankly think we're there because of the many steps that have been taken by this entire community. So I think back to the waterfront development project and the great partnership and engagement that we saw from Lower Elwha in what we can do with the circle up areas and the waterfront. The fact that if you go back to the original public meeting, the foundational element for the waterfront planning was something called the Arts Slam, which was bringing together all of the different arts groups in the community to brainstorm ideas of what that vision for the waterfront looked like, And ultimately, it took us very far. And if you look at the progress and take the time to reflect on what everyone in this community has done, whether it is the school district bringing together the students to create the art, whether it is the Chamber of Commerce cleaning up the downtown so we can see the beauty of the art that exists in place. The community has come together in so many different ways to celebrate arts in this community, and I think it's a matter of we have a responsibility to see that continue.
I just want to close this question with a couple of thoughts. I mean, one is that we have to sacrifice something to be part of these conversations. Everyone in this room is busy. Field Hall is doing the best that we can right now to be inclusive with these conversations. We're live streaming tonight. And for those of you who are watching on live stream, please email us at info@fieldhallevents.org with your thoughts, concerns, questions, requests, anything you want, so you can be part of this conversation. I know that Francis had a meeting in Olympia tonight in Oregon, and sacrificed that meeting to be here with our community, and it's hard to be in two places at once. Wendy is sacrificing not doodling right now and going crazy in her seat. So we know that it's a lot to ask to come and participate, but we also know we live in a democracy. It's something to cherish. It's something to fight for, so that by choosing to be here, we also hope that you get the joy of being in community. And now you know from Wendy, you'll live longer just by being here and connecting to others. So there is benefit. There's benefit with that sacrifice. And Field Hall is just, we want you to participate, to sacrifice some other time for something so that we can build this together. So these thoughts and these conversations, it's all part of what Michael is talking about with imagining our future. So there are a lot of board members and staff sitting out there. The next step of tonight is to have some small group conversations. But I do want to close the live stream, and I want to do that with Brooke, our board president, giving us closing remarks. So we'll close the panel, we'll close the live stream, but please stay, have conversations at your tables. Board members will take notes. We will collect your notes, and there's still more food to eat. And let's finish that food together tonight. So here's our board president, Judge Brooke Taylor.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Michael, for a presentation that for our board members, if nothing else, was reaffirming that we are doing something that's important for our community. So thank you to our respondents, our panelists, and all of you who came out on this nice winter evening in May, which if you live here, you're accustomed to and probably shouldn't complain about. I'm going to give you a couple of save the date memos, but before I do that, I want to tell you about one thing that kept coming to my mind hearing the questions and the answers about how this impacts our community. The Port Angeles Waterfront Center, which is the nonprofit that I'm president of and our board members make policy for, has, in addition to its mission statement and its vision, a set of 10 written guiding principles. And those are principles that we believe in and that we resort to when we have tough policy decisions to make. One of those guiding principles is this: that every child who graduates from a high school in Clallam County will have had an opportunity at least once to do something on the stage of the Donna Morris Auditorium in our state-of-the-art theater building. Now that's something we are going to accomplish one way or another, by hook or by crook. And I think it is a response to a lot of the questions we had tonight about partnerships and connectivity and accessibility and how arts raises the consciousness and all of those things. I want to see kids up on that stage, which is going to be a world-class stage, whether it's a recital or an award ceremony or the high school band or a piano recital or anything. We're going to get the kids in there. and that place is going to feel like home to them. It's going to be accessible, it's going to be welcoming, and they won't have to go to Carnegie Hall once every 4 years to perform in a world-class theater. So, having said that, a couple of save the dates. The first one is June 2nd at 4 p.m. on site at the Field Arts and Events Hall. We're going to have what we're calling a press conference. There are going to be some major announcements made at that time, and just a little tantalizer there. We're going to give some major thank yous. We're going to recognize the people we call pillars of the community who purchased the naming rights to our 65 beautiful glulam pillars in the facility. We're going to give some other thank yous. We're going to have some refreshments. We're going to have some entertainment. And before it's all through, we might even have a party. So that's June 2nd, 4 o'clock downtown on our property. The other save the date is for August 4th, place and time to be determined. So when we started our community board program, we promised all of you who volunteered to participate that we wouldn't ask too much of you. There'd be 4 meetings to attend, 1 each quarter. This is our 3rd community board meeting, and we expanded it because we had this opportunity to hear from Michael. But the 4th and final one will be on August the 4th. So save the date if you're one of our community board members. And if there is further use for the community board, we're going to talk about it at that time. But for the time being, thank you all who have participated in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and that will be our 4th and presumably our final. So having said that, thank you all for coming, and we are now ready for our table discussions. So we would like to know what has resonated with you, what questions you have, comments you have. If the tough question wasn't asked, ask it in writing, and then what our staff will do is collate all of those responses, questions, and recommendations and bring them to our board, and we will act on those. Okay?
Thank you.